Civil rights advocates around the country are calling for a new process to reduce and prevent police misconduct. It involves standards and training and licensing. The idea will be discussed March 28th at a meeting in Roxbury. To explain the idea is our guest from the American Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts, the director of the Racial Justice Program, Rahsaan Hall. Thank you very much for being with us, Rahsaan.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
Well, this might be a new idea in Boston, but it's not so new in many other places, including Massachusetts.
Right. Well, actually, it's been around since the 1960s. New Mexico was the first state to have what's called a post commission, and Massachusetts, unfortunately, is one of only 6 states that does not have a post system, which stands for Police Officers Standards and Training, which allows there to be some sort of systemic standardized training of police and law enforcement officials, but also a certification or licensing process, and ultimately the ability to de-license or decertify officers.
Well, we certainly do have some kind of process in Boston that's supposed to provide oversight for misconduct. And again, we're not going to say it's ideal, but it's there. So why does this necessarily improve it that much?
Well, it improves it in several ways. First of all, it requires a greater level of accountability across the state. Every department, every municipal police department, every university police department, state police, sheriff's departments would all be held to the same standard of training. They would all be having the same level of information and updates in their training. What is important about this, though, is if an officer is involved in misconduct or has significant ethical violations or is convicted of a crime, they could then be delicensed or decertified, which would prevent them from going and working for another law enforcement agency. And what Massachusetts has now really is not tantamount to that, because the only thing really that prohibits an officer from applying to another department is having been convicted of a felony.
And that's pretty rare. But right now in Boston, don't we have some kind of a process? I mean, I'm sure they have training for officers.
Yeah, so the Boston Police Department is one of the few municipalities or cities that has its own training academy. I believe it's Boston, Springfield, Lowell, Worcester. I'm forgetting the other one. But so they have their own training academies. And as far as kind of the discipline and accountability, there are internal affairs departments that can conduct investigations, and departments can make sure that an officer is terminated in the event that there's been some sort of misconduct. But there's no statewide practice, and so we can try to rely on Boston to do this. But what happens if an officer who's being investigated then resigns in the midst of the investigation and then goes and works for Worcester or Southbridge or some smaller municipality that's cash strapped, doesn't want to wait for a new recruit, can't afford to pay for that recruit to go to training, but here's an officer who's been to the academy, has years of experience, they hire that person, but there's no way of knowing whether or not they are decertified or licensed because that process doesn't exist in Massachusetts.
Do you think this process adds some more transparency around what's going to be happening? I mean, certainly within a department, there's a body of information about every single officer, but maybe it's not as much noticeable that there could be a pattern.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that exists is a national decertification index. I think currently there are roughly 18,000 people nationally that are listed on this index. And so departments are required, departments in a state that has a post commission are required to report that information. So clearly there would be more transparency. And so if Massachusetts developed a post commission, all of the cities and towns, including Boston, would be required to report to that index that there are officers that have been decertified.
One thing I imagine would come into play here if Boston were to adopt something like this is that, well, you'd have to negotiate over that for the next contract with these police unions.
Right, and that's always a challenge. I think what makes this different, though, is this would have to be passed at the state level, and so legislation would have to be enacted to create a post commission. I think Boston would probably want to maintain their academy because they're very proud of the academy that they have. But I think there's ways to accommodate that where the Boston Police Academy could be certified as a post qualified training institution. And then I think there would be in the collective bargaining agreement negotiations around whether or not superior officers or commanders would be required to be compensated more because they have these new duties under a post system. But it's not anything that should be a stumbling block or prevent it from being enacted.
Ordinarily, what would an officer have to do to more or less be up to date on being certified?
So right now, what it requires to be a police officer, they do a background check, a psychological exam, they look at your criminal record, and then they have physical abilities tests that they take, and then they go through the police academy. And if they have completed the police academy, then they are able to become a police officer. Right now, what exists are in-service trainings that officers have access to. And you know, the Municipal Police Training Committee provides some of those trainings, but individual academies provide that as well. And so a post system standardizes it across the state.
Do you have any fear that another layer of accountability might also discourage some officers from taking assignments that are maybe more dangerous, where it's easier to fall into something that could be questioned as police conduct?
I don't think so. And again, one of the things that the post system does is it maintains that there is proper training. And so some of those more challenging or more dangerous positions or assignments, hopefully a post system would ensure that the officers have the appropriate level of training to take on those assignments. And again, it varies from state to state. Some states are very limited in scope as far as what constitutes a violation that would require decertification or delicensing. In some, it's just criminal convictions. In others, it's more robust. It includes criminal convictions for felonies and misdemeanors, but also includes things like violations of ethical standards and duties that could result in misconduct or that could be considered misconduct and result in being decertified.
You should mention the meeting is going to be taking place on Monday, March 28th?
Yes, Monday, March 28th at 6 p.m. at Roxbury Community College. We have the national expert, Professor Roger Goldman, coming in from St. Louis to talk about the post system and what it is, how it works in many of the states that it's being used, and what it could possibly look like in Massachusetts. And the following day, March 29th at 11 o'clock a.m., there'll be a legislative briefing so we can kind of help get our legislators informed. There's pending legislation. Representative David Vieira has introduced to have a commission review the implementation of it, but we want to provide our elected officials more opportunity to know as much as they possibly can about post, because it's past time. We should not be one of only 6 states that does not have it.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Rahsaan Hall from the Mass ACLU.